It's a real story. We snuck into an abandoned theme park. What happened next will terrify you. End quote. You guys are chickens, end quote. Mark taunted, his grin wide in the glow of his phone. Flashlight. We stood at the rusting, imposing gates of end quote. Eternity Gardens, end quote. An abandoned theme park swallowed by time and whispers. Rumors clung to the place like the overgrown vines, accidents, disappearances, a final, cursed ride. Sarah, ever the cautious one, shivered. End quote. It probably just urban legends, Mark. But still, end quote. Alex, always up for a challenge, nudged me. End quote. Come on, it'd be an adventure. Think of the photos, end quote. I hesitated. Abandoned places always felt heavy, but the thrill of trespassing, of defying the do not enter in signs, was a potent pull. End quote. All right, end quote. I conceded, my heart thumping. End quote. But we stick together, end quote. Scaling the fence was easier than expected, aided by a section where the wire mesh had rusted through. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of decay and damp earth. The park felt vast and eerily silent, a skeletal playground under the moon. We navigated through overgrown pathways, past faded, peeling murals of cheerful cartoon characters, now looking like macabre specters. The silence was punctuated only by the crunch of our footsteps on fallen leaves and the distant hoot of an owl. Every shadow seemed to writhe. Every creaking branch sounded like a whispered warning. A chill unrelated to the cool night air snaked down my spine. We reached the central plaza, a circular area dominated by a defunct, moss-covered fountain. Around it stood the skeletons of rides, a Ferris wheel reaching like skeletal hand into the sky, a carousel with headless horses, and in the distance, the towering structure of the park's most infamous attraction, end quote, the Kronos coaster, end quote, its tracks twisted and turned like a metal serpent, disappearing into the darkness. This was the ride the legend spoke of, the one that had supposedly taken its last riders on a journey from which they never returned. A morbid fascination drew us closer. Up close, the Kronos coaster was even more imposing. The entrance was overgrown. The sign faded to illegibility. The loading platform was coated in a thick layer of dust and grime. The coaster cars sat on the tracks, their paint chipped and faded, looking like forgotten mechanical beasts. A strange, almost metallic tang hung in the air around the ride. End quote. This is it, end quote. Alex breathed, his voice a mixture of excitement and apprehension. Sarah looked genuinely scared. End quote. Maybe we should just look, guys. Not get on, end quote. Mark, of course, was already heading towards the loading platform. Mark scrambled into the front car, his bravado masking a hint of nervousness. Alex was right behind him. I exchanged a hesitant glance with Sarah. The idea of getting on this rusted, potentially dangerous ride felt insane. But the dare, the thrill, the morbid curiosity was too strong. End quote. Come on, Sarah, end quote. I urged gently. With a reluctant sigh, she climbed into the car behind Alex and Mark. I followed, the cold metal seat chilling through my jeans. The safety bar felt surprisingly secure, clicking into place with a loud, final-sounding thud. We sat in the car, the silence of the park pressing in. Nothing happened. End quote. See, end quote. Sarah said, a hint of relief in her voice. End quote. It's just a broken ride, end quote. Mark was about to make a sarcastic comment when, without a sound, the car lurched forward. We all gasped. There was no power source, no operator booth that we could see. The ride simply started. A low, mechanical groan echoed from the tracks ahead. The air grew colder, and a strange, almost electrical hum filled the silence. We were moving inexorably onto the track. The car slowly ascended the first incline, the ancient chain groaning with effort. The view from the top was breathtaking and terrifying. The entire park lay spread out below, a silent, dark expanse under the moon. Then we plunged. The rush of wind was exhilarating, the twists and turns throwing us against the safety bars. It was a classic coaster experience, albeit a terrifyingly old one. We screamed, a mix of fear and adrenaline. But as we completed the first loop, something felt wrong. We did not slow down. We continued on the track, heading towards the next section of the ride. We went through a series of smaller drops and turns, the ride maintaining constant, unsettling speed. Then, as we rounded a corner, we saw it, the loading platform. We were back at the start. End quote. What the hell? End quote. Mark yelled over the wind. We passed the empty platform, the car not stopping. We were heading back up the first incline. A wave of unease washed over us. This was not right. The ride should have ended. We completed the first loop again, the familiar drops and turns now feeling less like a thrill and more like a trap. The initial exhilaration had evaporated, replaced by a growing sense of dread. We passed the loading platform for the third time, the silence of that area now feeling deafening. The ride was not just repeating, it was looping endlessly. The fun was gone, replaced by a cold, creeping fear. We were on a ride that had no end. As we went through the loops again, we started to hear things. Not just the wind rushing past, but whispers. Faint, indistinct voices carried on the air, seeming to come from the trees surrounding the track. They were too soft to understand, but their tone was undeniably mournful, filled with a deep sadness. Sarah clutched my arm, her knuckles white. "Did you hear that?" she whispered, her voice trembling. We all had. The park was not just abandoned, it felt inhabited. With each loop, the park outside the tracks seemed to change subtly. The trees seemed denser, the shadows deeper. The faded murals on the buildings seemed to twist and contort, the cheerful faces becoming grotesque. The silence of the park was now filled with a low, persistent hum, the source of which we could not identify. The ride itself remained the same, but the world around us was transforming, becoming more menacing with every pass. As we hit a particularly fast section of the ride, a thick, unnatural fog rolled in, clinging to the tracks. Through the swirling mist, we started to see shapes, indistinct, humanoid figures standing amongst the trees, their forms blurred and indistinct. They did not move, but their presence was palpable, their gazes seemingly fixed on our car as we rushed past. A collective gasp escaped us. This was not just our imagination. Something was in the forest. The whispers grew louder, more distinct. We could almost make out words now. Fragmented phrases that spoke of being lost, of waiting, of never leaving. The voices seemed to be coming from the figures in the fog, from the very air around us. They were the voices of the park's past, the echoes of those who had ridden this very coaster and, perhaps, never gotten off. The truth of the legends was starting to dawn on us, and it was more terrifying than we could have imagined. The whispers grew louder, more distinct. We could almost make out words now. Fragmented phrases that spoke of being lost, of waiting, of never leaving. The voices seemed to be coming from the figures in the fog, from the very air around us. They were the voices of the park and hashtag 39's past, the echoes of those who had ridden this very coaster and, perhaps, never gotten off. The truth of the legends was starting to dawn on us, and it was more terrifying than we could have imagined. As the whispers continued, fragmented images flashed in our minds, not our own memories, but glimpses of the past. We saw flashes of the park in its heyday, filled with laughing families. Then the smiles turned to screams. Accidents on the rides, hushed up and ignored. The faces of worried parents searching for lost children. The park had a history of tragedy, a dark underbelly hidden beneath the cheerful facade. The Kronos coaster seemed to be a focal point of this darkness. The whispers coalesced, forming a clearer narrative. We heard the story of the coaster. Last official ride years ago. A group of friends, just like us, seeking a thrill. The ride started, and like us, it never stopped. Their initial excitement turned to fear, then desperation. We saw their faces in our minds, their expressions mirroring our own terror. They were trapped, just as we were. The park had claimed them. The whispers revealed the true nature of the curse. The Kronos coaster wasn't just a ride, it was a trap for souls. Those who rode it and were consumed by fear, by regret, by a desire to escape, became part of the park, their spirits forever bound to the grounds, to the ride. They were the figures in the fog, the voices in the wind. The park fed on, their negative emotions, growing stronger, more malevolent. The whispers now spoke directly to us, their voices a chorus of despair and warning. End quote. Give in, end quote, they urged. End quote, let go. It is easier this way. Become one of us, end quote. The fear was overwhelming, a suffocating blanket. It was tempting to just surrender, to let the ride, the park, consume us. But a flicker of defiance ignited within us. We would not become. Another tragic story, another set of whispers in the wind. Clinging to each other, we fought against the encroaching despair. We focused on anything but the terror, memories of our lives outside the park, the people we loved, the future we still wanted to have. It was a desperate struggle against an unseen force. But our shared determination, our refusal to succumb to fear, seemed to push back against the park influence, if only slightly. As we continued to resist, the whispers faltered, the figures in the fog seemed to shrink back. The park hold on us seemed to weaken with each wave of shared resolve. The ride still had not stopped, but the oppressive atmosphere seemed to lift, replaced by a faint, almost imperceptible warmth. The whispers of despair were now mixed with fainter, hopeful echoes, the echoes of those who had fought and, perhaps, found a way to endure. The car rattled on, the familiar track now feeling like a path towards an uncertain future. We were still on the ride, still trapped in the park, but something had shifted. The terror had not vanished, but it no longer held the same suffocating grip. We had faced the park's darkness and refused to be consumed. The ride continued, but as we approached the loading platform once more, a new feeling settled over us, not fear, but a desperate, fragile hope. The loop had not ended, but perhaps, just perhaps, we had found a way to break the curse from within. The ride was still going, but our journey was far from over.